In the quiet town of Makiri, where the sun always rose gently over the hills and children played by the dusty roads, there lived a young woman named Aisha. She was known by everyone as the girl with a bright smile and soft voice. She worked at a small cafe in the middle of the market, serving tea and bread to traders and travelers who passed through town. Every morning she woke early, washed her face with cold water, and wrapped her head in a clean scarf before walking to work. People often greeted her kindly, saying she was hard-working and polite. But deep inside, Aisha carried a secret that she could not share with anyone. A few months before, Aisha had fallen in love with a young man named Musa. He was tall and gentle, a mechanic who fixed bicycles at the corner shop. They had spent many evenings talking by the riverside, dreaming of a life together. Musa had promised to marry her once he saved enough money. Aisha believed him. She believed every word he said because he looked at her with warmth and care. But one day, Musa left Makiri to find work in another town, and he never returned. His phone stopped working, and no one heard from him again. Weeks later, Aisha began to feel sick in the mornings. She lost her appetite and often felt dizzy at work. At first, she thought it was just stress or the heat of the sun. But when the sickness didn't stop, she borrowed a small test from a friend in secret. When she saw the result, her hands shook and tears filled her eyes. She was pregnant. The world around her felt like it was spinning. She sat on the floor for hours, staring at the wall, unable to move. She could already hear her mother's voice in her mind, angry, disappointed, and heartbroken. Her parents were known to be strict and respected in the town. Her father was a church leader, and her mother helped with community work. They had raised Aisha to live with dignity and follow tradition. A child born outside marriage would bring great shame to their name. Aisha knew what would happen if they found out. She imagined her father's silence, her mother's tears, and the whispers of the neighbors. People in Makiri loved gossip. News spread faster than the wind. One rumor could destroy everything she had worked for. So she decided to hide it. Every morning, she tied her clothes tighter and wrapped herself in larger scarves. She smiled at customers, even when her heart ached. She laughed with her co-workers, though her mind was always heavy. Every night, she cried quietly on her small bed, pressing a pillow to her face so no one would hear. The walls of her room had seen her pain, her fear, and her endless prayers. She asked God for a way out, for a miracle, for something that would make it all disappear. Days turned into weeks. Her body began to change, but she learned to hide it well. She avoided her mother's eyes when they spoke and made excuses not to join family dinners. Sometimes, she stayed longer at work, pretending there was extra cleaning to do. The owner of the cafe, an older woman named Mama Zuri, noticed that Aisha looked tired. "Are you sick, my daughter?" she asked one afternoon. Aisha smiled weakly and said, "No, Mama, I am just not sleeping well." Mama Zuri nodded but kept watching her with worry. At night, Aisha would sit by the small window in her room and watch the stars. The town was quiet then, and only the sound of crickets filled the air. She often thought about Musa. Did he know? Would he ever come back? Would he care if he did? Each time, her heart felt heavier. She wanted to hate him for leaving, but part of her still missed him. Sometimes she whispered his name into the night, hoping the wind might carry it to wherever he was. As the months passed, it became harder to hide. Her clothes grew tighter, and her steps slower. The fear inside her grew with the baby. She felt trapped between love and shame, between faith and fear. She couldn't tell her parents, and she couldn't tell her friends. One evening, as she was closing the cafe, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She gasped and held onto a chair until it passed. She knew then that time was running out. Something would happen soon. She didn't know when or how, but she could feel it. The days that followed were heavy with worry. She stopped laughing at work. She avoided people as much as she could. Sometimes, she would stare into the distance, lost in her thoughts. She wondered what kind of life her baby would have. Would it grow up knowing love, or would it suffer because of her mistake? The thought tore her apart. She felt unready, helpless, and alone. Her parents began to notice her strange behavior. One night, her mother knocked on her door and asked softly, "Aisha, are you all right?" Aisha froze. Her voice trembled as she answered, "Yes, Mama, I am fine." Her mother didn't believe her, but she said nothing more. When she left, Aisha broke down again, whispering to herself, "I'm sorry, Mama." One Sunday morning, while everyone was at church, Aisha sat on her bed holding her stomach. She could feel the baby move faintly inside her. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "What will I do?" she whispered. The sunlight came through the window, falling softly on her face, but even its warmth couldn't comfort her. She wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of what she carried. Her only friend, a young girl named Halima, noticed her distress. One afternoon, when they were cleaning tables, Halima said, "Aisha, you've been so quiet these days. Tell me what's wrong." Aisha shook her head, forcing a smile. "Nothing, Halima. I'm just tired." Halima touched her shoulder gently. "You can tell me anything," she said. But Aisha couldn't. She was too scared that even Halima would judge her. Every day felt like a battle she couldn't win. The baby was growing, the fear was growing, and the lies were becoming harder to keep. She tried to pray but often stopped halfway through, feeling unworthy to speak to God. Sometimes she would walk to the river at night and watch the water flow. It made her feel small, like her problems might wash away with the current. But they never did. As the wind blew through the trees and the crickets sang, Aisha stood by the river one night and whispered, "Please God, help me." The moonlight shone on her face, and for a moment she felt calm. But deep inside, she knew a storm was coming. A secret like hers could not stay hidden forever. Something was bound to happen soon, something that would change her life forever. And though she did not know it yet, that night was only the beginning of a story that would shake the quiet town of Makiri and touch every heart that heard it. The night was dark and heavy with rain. The sky over Makiri flashed again and again with lightning, and the wind howled through the trees. Everyone in the town had already gone inside, locking their doors and windows. The sound of thunder echoed over the rooftops, shaking the quiet houses. But in one small room behind a house near the market, a young woman was in pain. Aisha lay on the floor, her body shaking and her heart racing. The storm outside could not compare to the storm inside her. She had not expected the baby to come that night. The pain had started earlier in the evening when she was washing dishes. At first, she thought it was nothing, just another wave of discomfort. But soon the pain became sharp and deep. She tried to ignore it. She tried to pray. She told herself that it was too early, that this could not be happening yet. The baby wasn't due for weeks. She was not ready. Nothing in her life was ready. The rain beat against the roof, and the wind pushed water through the small cracks in the window. Aisha sat on the edge of her bed, breathing hard. Her hands trembled as she held her stomach. Another wave of pain came, stronger than before, forcing her to cry out. She bit her lip to stop the sound. She didn't want anyone to hear her. If her parents or the neighbors found out, everything would be over. They would know her secret. They would know the truth she had tried to hide for so long. Her mind raced. She thought about her father's face, her mother's tears, and the gossip that would spread through Makiri by morning. Her heart pounded faster. She got up slowly and went to the small bathroom behind the house. The rain had already soaked the ground outside, and the mud stuck to her feet. She held her stomach as she walked, each step heavier than the last. Her clothes clung to her body, and her scarf was already wet from the rain. Inside the bathroom, the single candle she lit flickered weakly. The walls were old, and the floor was cold. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard, whispering prayers under her breath. "God, please help me. Please make it stop." But the pain only grew stronger. Her body trembled, and sweat mixed with tears on her face. She felt dizzy. She wanted to call someone for help, but fear held her back. What would she say? Who would come for her? Minutes turned into hours. The thunder roared above her as she crouched on the floor, crying softly. Then, suddenly, a sharp wave of pain cut through her body, stronger than anything she had ever felt. She screamed, unable to hold it back this time. The sound was lost in the thunder. And then, just like that, the pain changed. She felt something leave her body, small, weak, and silent. A tiny cry filled the air for a second, barely louder than the rain. Aisha froze. She looked down, and her breath caught in her throat. The baby was there, so small, so fragile, and barely moving. Its skin was pale, and its tiny hands twitched weakly. Panic filled her heart. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to help it. "No, no, no," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's too early. It's too early." She looked around the small bathroom, searching for something, anything. There was nothing but the sound of the rain and her own trembling breath. She knelt beside the baby, unsure if it was even alive. Fear wrapped around her like a chain. Her mind filled with voices, her mother's disappointment, her father's anger, the laughter of neighbors, the shame she could never escape. She felt trapped, cornered by her own mistake. She touched the baby gently, and it moved just a little. That tiny movement broke her heart. Tears streamed down her face. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't." Her thoughts became wild and desperate. She was alone, soaked and trembling. The candle flickered, almost dying. She told herself the baby wouldn't live. It was too small, too early. She told herself that this was fate, that maybe it was better this way. She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. She stood up slowly, her legs weak. The room spun around her. She covered her mouth to stop her sobs. Her hands were shaking as she looked down one last time. The baby's faint movements were growing slower. She couldn't bear to look anymore. Her mind screamed for her to leave, to run away, to forget this night ever happened. The rain outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled through the sky like drums. Aisha opened the bathroom door and stepped out into the darkness. The wind hit her face, cold and harsh. She took one last look behind her. For a moment, she thought she heard a small sound, like a whimper. But she told herself it was just the wind. She turned and ran. The streets were flooded. Mud splashed under her feet as she ran blindly through the storm. Her scarf fell off, but she didn't stop to pick it up. Her tears mixed with the rain. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. She didn't know where she was going. She just wanted to get away. Away from the pain, away from the fear, away from the truth. She ran until her legs gave out. She fell near the market stalls, empty now and covered with water. She sat there, hugging herself, shaking. The sound of rain on the tin roofs above her felt like the beating of 1,000 drums in her head. Her mind was blank, her heart numb. She stared at the ground, unable to think, unable to move. Time passed slowly. The storm began to quiet, the thunder fading into the distance. Aisha sat there for a long time, soaked and shivering. She thought of the small baby she had left behind. A wave of guilt hit her chest so strong that she could hardly breathe. But she pushed it away. She told herself there was nothing she could do now. She told herself the baby was gone. When the first light of morning touched the sky, she finally stood up. Her clothes were heavy with water, and her body felt weak. She walked home slowly, keeping her head down. The streets were empty, except for puddles reflecting the pale light of dawn. Her eyes were red from crying, her lips dry and trembling. When she reached her house, she slipped quietly inside. Her parents were still asleep. She went to her room, closed the door, and sank to the floor. Her body hurt all over. Her heart felt empty. She wrapped herself in a blanket and rocked back and forth, whispering, I'm sorry," over and over again. The world outside began to wake up. Birds started to sing, children began to laugh on their way to school, and the sound of morning filled the air. But inside Aisha's room, everything was still. The rain had stopped, but her tears had not. She pressed her face into the pillow to hide her sobs. As the morning light grew stronger, she tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the baby. The small face, the tiny hands, the weak movement. It wouldn't leave her mind. It followed her in her dreams, in her thoughts, in every heartbeat. She tried to convince herself it was for the best, that she had no choice, but deep down, she knew she had done something she could never undo. And somewhere, just a few steps away, the storm had washed the night clean, but it could not wash away what had happened in that small bathroom. The rain had stopped falling, but Aisha's heart was still drowning. The morning sun rose over Makiri with calm beauty. The air was soft, the sky clear, and the sound of birds filled the trees. Life in the small town had returned to its usual rhythm after the storm, but there was one story everyone could not stop talking about, the miracle baby. People whispered about it in the market, in the churchyard, and beside the water wells. They said the child had been found in the bathroom after the heavy rain and that Nurse Lila had worked all night to save it. Some called it a blessing, others said it was a sign from God. But to one woman, the story brought only pain. Aisha sat quietly in her small room, staring at the wall. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands trembled as she held her scarf. She had not slept properly since the night of the storm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the baby's face, small, pale, and helpless. She heard the faint cry that had followed her into her dreams. She had tried to forget it, but the sound would not leave her. When the neighbors started talking about the baby that had been found alive, Aisha's heart nearly stopped. She had been sweeping the yard when two women passed by her gate, whispering excitedly. "They say the baby is alive," one said. "A miracle! Nurse Lila is taking care of it." Aisha's broom slipped from her hand. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Alive," she whispered to herself. Her legs felt weak. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself. She wanted to ask questions, but fear held her back. All day, she moved like a shadow, lost in her thoughts. The words kept echoing in her mind, "The baby is alive." She didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. Guilt burned in her chest. She remembered how she had run into the storm, how she had left that small, fragile life behind. And now that life was still breathing. It felt like the truth had found her, waiting patiently for her to face it. That night, she could not eat. She sat by the window, staring at the stars. The world outside was peaceful, but her heart was in chaos. "What have I done?" she whispered. She covered her face with her hands and cried quietly, afraid her parents would hear. She knew she could not hide forever. The secret was too heavy. The guilt was too deep. The next morning, when the first light touched the sky, she made a decision. She wrapped her scarf tightly around her head and left her house before anyone could see her. The road to the clinic was quiet. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers. Her feet felt heavy with every step, but she kept walking. Her heart beat fast, and her palms were cold. She didn't know what she would say or how Nurse Lila would react. She only knew that she had to go. She had to see the baby. When she reached the small clinic, she stopped at the gate and took a deep breath. Through the open window, she could hear the soft voice of Nurse Lila talking to someone. She almost turned back, but something inside her whispered, "Go." So she pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the clinic smelled of soap and herbs. The air was warm and quiet. Aisha's eyes went to the small bed in the corner. There, wrapped in a white cloth, lay the baby. Tiny, peaceful, and breathing softly. A nurse stood beside the bed, humming a song as she adjusted the blanket. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. Her knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of the door to stop herself from falling. Nurse Lila turned when she heard the sound. "Yes." "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Aisha could not speak. Her throat tightened, and her lips trembled. For a moment, they just looked at each other. One woman calm and kind, the other pale and broken. Nurse Lila saw the fear in Aisha's eyes, the guilt written across her face. She had seen that look before in many people, the look of someone running from their own heart. "Come in, child," Nurse Lila said softly. Aisha took a slow step forward, then another. She could hardly breathe. Her eyes never left the baby. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. When she stood close enough, her voice came out as a whisper. "It's mine," she said. Nurse Lila looked at her quietly. She said nothing at first, only watched her with eyes full of understanding. Aisha began to shake. "It's my baby," she said again, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I thought it was gone. I thought it wouldn't live. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Please forgive me. I didn't want to hurt it. I just didn't know what else to do." The nurse slowly walked closer and took Aisha's trembling hands in hers. "Sit down," she said softly. Aisha obeyed, her body shaking with sobs. For a long time, the room was quiet except for the sound of her crying. Nurse Lila waited patiently until her tears slowed. Then she spoke, her voice calm and gentle. "Child, what's done is done. You can't change the past. But you can decide what happens next. Aisha looked up, her face wet with tears. Do you hate me? She asked in a trembling voice. Nurse Lila shook her head. No, my dear. I don't hate you. You were afraid. Fear can make people do things they never thought they would do. What matters now is that you're here. You came back. That means something. Aisha wiped her eyes with the edge of her scarf. Can I hold the baby? She whispered. The nurse nodded. Carefully, she lifted the small child and placed it gently in Aisha's arms. Aisha gasped. The baby was warm, soft, and alive. Tiny fingers curled around her thumb. A sound rose in her throat, part sob, part laughter. You're still here, she whispered. You're still here. Tears rolled down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. They were tears of wonder and regret mixed together. She rocked the baby slowly, whispering words of apology. I'm sorry, my little one. I'm so sorry. Nurse Lila stood beside her, watching quietly. She saw the way Aisha's hands trembled, the way her eyes softened. It was the look of a mother finally accepting her child. You can make it right, she said gently. If you truly want to change, start today. Stay with the baby. Help it grow. Love it. That's all it needs. Aisha nodded, still crying. I will, she whispered. I promise I will never leave again. She kissed the baby's forehead and held it close to her chest. For a long time, they sat together in silence. The morning light streamed through the window, falling softly on their faces. The baby stirred and made a small sound, like a sigh. Aisha smiled through her tears. Something inside her began to heal, slowly, quietly, but surely. When she finally left the clinic that day, she walked differently. Her steps were lighter, though her eyes still carried sadness. The villagers who saw her didn't know what had happened, but they noticed the change. They whispered among themselves as she passed, but Aisha didn't care anymore. She had faced her truth. She had seen her child. That night, when she lay in bed, she felt peace for the first time in many weeks. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. People would talk. Some would judge. But she also knew she would no longer run. She had made a promise, to her baby, to herself, and to God. In the quiet of her room, Aisha whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for another chance." And for the first time, when she closed her eyes, she slept without fear. The sun was just beginning to rise over Makiri, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air cool and damp. The ground was covered in puddles, and the sound of birds slowly filled the quiet morning. Smoke started to rise from a few kitchen fires as the women of the village began to prepare breakfast. It looked like a peaceful day was about to begin. But peace would not last long. Something was about to happen that would make everyone in the town stop and whisper in shock. A young boy named Tund woke up early that morning. He was 10 years old, full of energy, and always the first to get up. His mother had sent him to fetch water and clean the bathroom before school. Tund didn't mind doing chores. He liked being helpful. He picked up a small bucket and stepped outside, humming a tune as he walked through the wet grass. The rain had left everything shining. He liked the smell of the wet earth after a storm. It made the whole world feel fresh again. When he reached the small outdoor bathroom behind the compound, he stopped for a moment. Everything was quiet except for the sound of dripping water. The door creaked as he pushed it open. He took one step inside, and then he froze. There was a sound, soft, weak, and strange. It was not the sound of water or wind. It was a cry, faint and shaky, like that of a tiny kitten. Tund frowned and leaned closer. The sound came again, clearer this time. His heart started beating fast. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a baby. He blinked, confused, and took another step forward. "Hello," he whispered. The cry came again, short and fragile. Tund's eyes widened. He looked down and saw something small and wrapped in wet cloth. His breath caught in his throat. "Ma! Ma!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "Ma, come quick!" He turned and ran out of the bathroom as fast as he could. His mother, who was cooking porridge in the kitchen, dropped her spoon when she heard him. "What is it?" she called, rushing outside. Tund pointed toward the bathroom, his face pale and his voice shaking. "There's a baby in there, Mama. A real baby." His mother didn't believe him at first. "What are you saying, Tund?" she asked, but when she stepped closer and heard the faint cry herself, she gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's true." She called for help, her voice echoing through the compound. "Neighbors, come quickly. There's a baby here." Within minutes, people began running from every direction. Men, women, and children gathered outside the bathroom, whispering in disbelief. One of the older men pushed the door open carefully and went inside. The baby's weak cry broke everyone's heart. The man bent down and gently lifted the small, cold body wrapped in a torn cloth. The crowd gasped when they saw it, a tiny newborn, still alive but barely breathing. The baby's skin was pale, and its hands were trembling. "Who could do this?" one woman cried. "Who would leave a baby like this?" Another woman took off her shawl and wrapped it around the child. "We must take the baby to the clinic," she said quickly. "It won't survive out here." Tund's mother nodded. "Hurry! Someone run and tell Nurse Lila," she shouted. Nurse Lila was the only nurse in Makiri's small clinic. Everyone in the town knew her. She was kind, brave, and strong. People said she had hands that could heal. A young man grabbed his bicycle and rode fast through the muddy road to the clinic. "Nurse Lila," he shouted as he reached the small building. "Come quick. There's a baby. Someone left a baby in the bathroom near the market." Without wasting a second, Nurse Lila grabbed her medical bag and followed him back. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She had seen many hard things in her life, but this was different. When she reached the scene, the crowd parted to let her through. She knelt beside the woman holding the baby and gently took the child into her arms. "It's still alive," she said softly, touching its tiny chest. "But it's very weak. We must move fast." She wrapped the baby carefully in her coat and turned to the others. "Bring hot water, clean cloths, and someone help me get to the clinic now." The people moved quickly. 2 men helped her carry the baby, and a few women followed with cloths and blankets. Tund walked behind them, silent now, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. He had never seen anything like this. His small hands were shaking, and his heart beat fast as he watched Nurse Lila move with calm determination. When they reached the clinic, Nurse Lila laid the baby on a small bed. She checked its breathing, its heartbeat, and its temperature. It was very cold and barely moving. She began working immediately, heating water, rubbing the baby's arms and legs, and whispering softly as she worked. "Stay with me, little one. Don't give up. You're stronger than you look." The villagers waited outside, whispering and praying. Some said the baby must have been cursed, others said it was a miracle that it was still alive. No one knew where it had come from. But everyone agreed that Nurse Lila was the only one who could save it. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, lighting up the wet streets of Makiri. Inside the clinic, Nurse Lila did not rest. She cleaned the baby, fed it drop by drop, and wrapped it tightly to keep it warm. She refused to stop, even when her hands began to ache. "You will live," she said quietly, her eyes full of strength. "I promise you will live." After what felt like forever, the baby made a small sound, a soft, weak cry. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Nurse Lila smiled for the first time that morning. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the spirit. You're a fighter." Outside, the villagers heard the cry and gasped. Some began to clap, others wiped tears from their eyes. "It's alive," someone said. "The baby is alive." The news spread quickly through Makiri. People who had not even seen the child began talking about it. "A miracle baby," they called it. "A child saved from the storm." Tund stood near the door, listening. His heart swelled with pride and relief. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew he would never forget that sound, the small cry that changed everything. Later, when the baby was resting, Nurse Lila stepped outside. The crowd surrounded her, asking questions. "Will it survive? Who left it there? Is it a boy or a girl?" She held up her hand for silence. "The baby is very weak," she said gently, But it's alive, and that is a blessing. As for who left it there, I do not know. But for now, let's thank God for this life." The people nodded quietly. Some whispered prayers. Others looked at the sky. The storm that had filled the night with fear had now given way to something unexpected, a small sign of hope. When everyone began to leave, Tund stayed behind. He peeked into the room where the baby slept. The little child lay wrapped in a clean white cloth, its chest rising and falling slowly. Nurse Lila noticed him at the door and smiled. "You found this baby," she said softly. "That was very brave." Tund smiled shyly and said, "It was crying, nurse. I just followed the sound." She nodded. "Sometimes," she said, "that's all it takes, a person who listens when others don't." As the morning sun filled the clinic with light, Nurse Lila sat beside the baby, whispering another prayer. The days after Aisha's return to the clinic passed slowly, but each one brought small changes. She no longer hid from the world. Every morning, she woke early and walked to the small clinic, her scarf neatly tied, her eyes still soft with sadness but brighter than before. Nurse Lila had allowed her to stay and help. It was her way of healing, a second chance to make things right. The first few days were hard. Some villagers avoided her. When she passed by the market, people whispered quietly, their eyes following her. A few looked at her with pity, others with judgment. But Aisha did not look back. She kept her head low and her heart steady. Inside, she still felt the weight of what she had done, but she was determined to change. Every time she entered the clinic and saw her baby sleeping peacefully, she felt a new strength rise within her. The baby had grown stronger since that stormy night. Its cheeks were fuller now, its tiny hands reaching out whenever Aisha leaned over the bed. Nurse Lila had done everything she could to help it survive, but now Aisha took that role into her own hands. She fed the baby carefully, changed its blankets, and sang soft songs in the evenings. Sometimes, when the baby smiled in its sleep, she would whisper, "You are my blessing." After a few weeks, Nurse Lila said to her, "You should give the baby a name." Aisha thought about it for a long time. She wanted a name that meant something, something that spoke of light after darkness. Finally, she said softly, "I will call the baby Baraka. It means blessing." Nurse Lila smiled and nodded. "A beautiful name," she said. "And true." As time passed, Aisha began helping around the clinic in more ways. She cleaned the rooms, washed the sheets, and helped carry medicine to the small villages nearby. Nurse Lila trusted her and often taught her small things: how to mix herbs for fevers, how to clean wounds, and how to calm frightened mothers. Aisha listened carefully, eager to learn. It made her feel useful again. It made her feel alive. Sometimes, young women came to the clinic, afraid and crying. Some were hiding secrets of their own. They reminded Aisha of herself, lost, scared, and ashamed. At first, she didn't know what to say to them. But one day, when a girl named Miriam came, trembling and unable to speak, Aisha took her hand and said softly, "It's okay. I understand." Those two words opened the girl's heart. From that moment, Aisha became someone others could talk to, someone who understood pain and didn't judge. Word began to spread. People started seeing Aisha differently. They no longer spoke of her mistake, but of her courage. They saw how she worked every day without complaint, how she cared for others with patience and love. Slowly, their whispers changed from gossip to respect. The same women who once turned away from her now greeted her with kind eyes. Some even brought small gifts for Baraka, a piece of cloth, a baby rattle, or a little hat. One afternoon, an old woman who had once criticized her came to the clinic with her sick granddaughter. Aisha helped them both, offering water and comfort. When the old woman was leaving, she looked at Aisha and said quietly, "You have a good heart, child. I was wrong about you." Aisha smiled and nodded, though tears filled her eyes. That simple moment meant more to her than any apology. Baraka continued to grow. The baby's laughter filled the clinic with warmth. Everyone loved the child who had once been found in the storm. Some said Baraka brought peace to the clinic. Whenever the baby smiled, it reminded people that miracles still existed, that hope could grow even in the hardest soil. Nurse Lila often watched Aisha and Baraka together and felt proud. She had seen Aisha's transformation, from a frightened girl to a strong, gentle mother. One evening, as they closed the clinic, she said, "You know, Aisha, your story will help many people one day." Aisha looked up, surprised. "My story?" she asked. "Yes," Nurse Lila said with a smile. "People need to know that mistakes do not end a life. They can be the beginning of something new." Aisha thought about those words that night as she rocked Baraka to sleep. The wind blew softly through the window, carrying the sounds of crickets and the distant laughter of children. She looked down at her baby and whispered, "You are the reason I found myself again. You are my hope." Baraka stirred and smiled in her sleep, and Aisha felt a deep peace fill her heart. Months turned into a year. Aisha became known as Nurse Lila's helper. The villagers trusted her and often came to her first before going to the clinic. She listened to their worries, offered small remedies, and comforted them when they were afraid. Her kindness drew people closer. Even the children of Makiri followed her around, calling her Auntie Aisha. One day, a young girl approached her behind the market. The girl was crying, clutching her hands together. "I made a mistake," she said through tears. "My parents will never forgive me." Aisha took her hand gently and said, "I once thought the same. But forgiveness begins when you forgive yourself. You must face the truth and never run from it." The girl nodded, her tears softening into hope. Aisha knew that this was her purpose now, to guide others from the darkness she once lived in. At the clinic, she continued learning. Nurse Lila taught her how to record patient notes, how to prepare injections, and how to comfort mothers during childbirth. Each new skill made Aisha stronger. She no longer saw herself as the girl who made a mistake, but as a woman who had found strength through pain. Sometimes at night, when she sat outside with Baraka in her arms, she looked at the stars and remembered the storm. It no longer haunted her. It was now a memory that reminded her how far she had come. She no longer asked, "Why did this happen to me?" Instead, she said, "Thank you for showing me mercy." The people of Makiri had come to love both Aisha and her child. During festivals, they smiled when they saw Baraka running around with other children. They would whisper, "That's the miracle baby. The one who survived the storm." And when Aisha heard those words, she felt tears of quiet joy. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the hills, Nurse Lila called Aisha to the porch. "You've done well," she said. "You've turned your sorrow into something good. I'm proud of you." Aisha smiled softly. "You gave me a chance," she said. "You believed in me when no one else did." Nurse Lila shook her head gently. "No, child. You chose to believe in yourself. That's what saved you." As night fell, Aisha held Baraka close, watching the sky turn dark and the stars appear one by one. The town was peaceful again. Somewhere far away, the river murmured, and the wind carried the scent of rain. She thought about all that had happened, the fear, the guilt, the miracle, and the forgiveness. Every piece of her story had brought her to this moment. Baraka looked up at her and giggled, and Aisha laughed softly, brushing her baby's hair. "You are my blessing," she whispered again. "You turned my pain into love." And from that day on, Aisha's story was told in Makiri whenever someone lost hope. Mothers told it to their daughters, and young women whispered it to each other when life became too heavy. They said, "Remember Aisha. Remember Baraka. Remember that from pain, love can rise again." The end.